What's up, everybody? My name is Sarah. I hope you are all having a spectacular day. I just finished my first ride back after the rest and recovery week, and boy, those are really a treat. It feels like your first day on the bike. What a fucking hot mess that was. So I'm going to sit here in my little blanket, and we're going to have a little bit of a fireside chat. I wanted to talk about something that I've been really thinking about for the last couple weeks, and I think it's an extremely important subject to talk about in the endurance realm, and more specifically, cycling. And that's the idea of the community, the global community of cyclists. And the title of this video is Cycling in Crisis? And my contention is that if it isn't right now, we're very close. And I think a lot of some of what we're seeing, the downturn of cycling, really comes down to this idea of community. And I just want to kind of talk about, my opinion and what I've seen, and maybe some of the things that I think that we can do to help that situation. Unfortunately, this isn't a two-way conversation in that we can kind of go back and forth live in real time, but my opinion isn't definitely not the end-all be-all, and I'd really love to hear you guys weigh in the comments below, because I think the lens with which we view this issue is going to change depending on where we live, age, gender, years of experience in the sport. So I'd love to hear what you guys think, being from around the world and in different areas and with different experience, if you think I'm just way off the mark or if you see the same things that I do. And I think a lot of this starts from a broader idea of community. And without trying to risk the okay boomer response, I think a huge concern is this idea of social media. Social media is extremely pervasive in 2020. It is what kind of guides a lot of what we do in life these days. I mean, we use it to advertise business, to look up business, to connect with people from around the world, whether we've known them since childhood or we've known them only from the social media. And what happens is that we create these little subcategories, these smaller groups, and we niche down, whether it's through focus groups or forums, if it's conversations and tagging and things like Twitter, using followers in a specific subject matter for things like Instagram, we're able to kind of create these smaller communities. Even my making this channel is a version of that, kind of having this conversation about endurance and sports with like-minded people who gravitate to this channel. It's a way to make a smaller community or sub-communities. And I think it's no secret to anybody that there's a lot of negativity that comes with social media and just the internet in general. There's this kind of anonymity that comes with being able to express your opinion or even just express any kind of nonsense without fear of repercussions, without fear of that face-to-face confrontation. You've got people who will just kind of drop into different places, spread some hate and vitriol, and then just scamper off like the cowards that they are. And you'll see that a lot, and the larger the platform or the larger the group, the more volume of that type of activity that you see. So if you go find a YouTube creator that has a lot more subscribers than I do, 50,000, 100,000, a million, right? Their comment section, they're filled with hundreds, if not thousands of comments. And if you go just scroll through them, you'll find just ridiculous, hateful comments. And I think what happens now is that we've seen it so often, we've started to desensitize to it, or ourselves to it rather, realizing that there's just people who are hateful, bored individuals, kind of feeling bad for somebody who has so little happiness and fulfillment in their lives that they really have nothing better to do than to bring other people down. And I think a lot of these larger communities and larger creators have learned to just kind of take that and let that roll off the back. If there's some substantive criticism, they may take that to heart. But just baseless nonsense commentary that comes from hateful people, that's easier to just filter out of the wash than it was, let's say, 5 years ago, 10 years ago. The problem is that doesn't translate to the smaller communities. So when we start to niche down into smaller interest groups, smaller creators, smaller whatever forums, and you get these people who are overly negative, they become louder because they seem to not they don't scale down in proportion to the larger group. So let's say you have 1 million subscribers or 1 million viewers on a video. 999,500 of them are probably going to either be neutral or positive. And then you're going to get those 500 assholes that are going to create a problem. But that doesn't scale down in the same percentage. In fact, the percentage of negativity in smaller groups seems to go up because people realize that they have a more captive audience. They realize if they're loud enough that people can't ignore them because there's just not as much traffic out there. You'll see this a lot in forums and Facebook groups, and it's not baseless, mindless hatred either. You do see that sometimes, but it becomes very focused. It's this idea of, I think it plays out the most in cycling in terms of this elitist attitude. These people who have, been riding a while and they forget what it's like to be new, and they're extremely judgmental and exclusionary to people who know less than them, that aren't as fast as them, that are coming in to the market or the industry. And it's just this ridiculous, I don't even understand why that is, because it's like everybody's forgotten, not everybody, but these people have forgotten what it's like to be brand new. You think that every cyclist has come into the interest or the hobby knowing everything there is to know about power and training and equipment? No. Anybody who tells you that they did is full of shit. So to come and act like the new people who ask questions, you're so stupid, you don't understand anything about FTP. You don't even know your own crank length? What a noob. Psh, you only have 9 speeds, jerk. Man, you're gonna get so dropped in every race because your equipment sucks. I don't even understand it. I really don't. And you don't just see it on the internet. It becomes a little bit more pervasive on the internet because there are people who pretend to have more chops than they do online than they do in the real world. But you do see this elitism, it carries into the real world. I don't know why cycling is so aggressive in this regard. My only guess is because it's a sport that's so steeped in tradition and just kind of like the rules type of thing that people just put on these airs, and whether it's in person or online, they treat the sport like it has to be this ultra exclusive group, and anybody else who's not up to speed, we just don't have the tolerance for it. Like, I can't be bothered with some noob who doesn't understand the first thing about power meters, that doesn't understand the first thing about race dynamics and tactics and training protocols. And God forbid they disagree with me on, my particular training regimen or nutrition regimen. All the gloves are off, right? There's no discourse anymore. It's just an elitist type of mentality. And I don't want to generalize, because I think for the most part, people are pretty respectful and inviting. But those people who are the most negative and the most driven by this elitism idea or this exclusion idea, they're so loud. They're so prevalent and so loud when it comes to the dialogue around the sport that I think it drives a lot of people away. New people come into these groups, or they come into the sport and they ask a question, and they're made to feel like their questions are stupid. And more often than not, their questions aren't stupid. They're not asking dumb questions. They're asking questions that none of us knew when we started in the sport, but they're treated like it is a stupid question, or they're treated like their achievements have no value because their power numbers aren't high enough or their average speed isn't high enough. And they exit the groups, and a lot of times they exit the sport, and we don't know that. We don't see that happening because that happens behind closed doors. When somebody feels like their value or their confidence is diminished, they think that they've picked the wrong hobby, and they put the bike back in the garage, or they throw it up on eBay, and they're done with it. And I don't think when people create this attitude, they think about the consequences of their actions or their attitude. And the reason this is important is not for me to act like I'm holier than thou or act preachy, because you know what? We've all had our days where we've said something that probably wasn't the nicest, or, didn't say the right thing, or weren't as inviting as we should have been, or, rode off the front and acted like an asshole on the bike. But if you look at the bigger picture and you look at what's happening to the sport, the best way to combat things like having race events, ones that have gone on for years, being canceled due to lack of support or lack of funding. I mean, look at the very cutting edge of international pro events, sponsors pulling out in droves, not knowing how we're going to even pay our professional cyclists, which is just, a few hundred, let alone talking about the amateur level, talking about the financial burdens that are being faced in different cycling avenues or triathlon, having to hold less races because they can't support it, the costs to the actual athlete of these races going up, having to try to split the difference in terms of prize purses. I mean, don't even get me started on the disparity between men and women. There's this vicious cycle of, the women don't draw enough eyeballs or don't have enough popularity, so we can't give them, the TV time, or we can't give them the prize purses. But then if you look at it, chicken and the egg, well, if you gave them the TV time and the prize purses, maybe the popularity would come and the cycle would begin. But the field sizes and the community isn't even large enough to support it. And you can apply that to both men and women. While I look at cycling as a hobby or a sport that is niche down enough to create these tight-knit communities and to be able to get really focused interest, but not so much that's going to really generate a lot of funding or money from like this small niche group. And what do I mean by that? It's kind of like, if you're familiar with the camera brand Leica, they create a decent quality camera. Is the quality commensurate with the cost? No, not really, but it's still a high quality device. So people with this disposable income and who have this really niche interest in photography and in that Leica market will spend the extra money to buy into that brand. And maybe it's a little bit of wealth signaling and status, but it's niched down enough to garner the funding that it needs to be sustainable. Cycling doesn't quite fall into that realm, but it's not big enough to pander to the masses enough to get enough funding, if that makes sense. I know that I probably went down a rabbit hole with that. But the reality is there's not enough eyeballs on cycling, especially at the amateur level, to really make it something sustainable. And if we keep turning people away from the community, acting with this elitist attitude, turning people who have been in the community out and turning new people away because we think that it needs to be this exclusive, highbrow type of sport, anybody who has a thought process like that is doing the sport a huge disservice. We need to be welcoming more people into the sport, bringing them in under our wings. You have to be responsible for them? No, you don't have to take responsibility for them. If you have the time and the wherewithal to help mentor somebody, or to even answer a question, whether it's online or in person, to help them come along, anything you can do to contribute is helpful. On the flip side of that, even if you're not acting like the elitist snob, even if you're not being exclusionary, and maybe you don't have the time to bring somebody under your wing, you can definitely help discourage that type of attitude amongst the community. Whether it's at your local race or ride, or whether it's on an online group, when you see people being abusive and inappropriate in these groups, call them on it. Because you know what? Censorship, I'm not on board with censorship. The moderators and the administrators aren't going to boot these people from the groups just because they're acting like an ass. But if the community speaks out and says that this type of dialogue, this type of conversation is just unacceptable, we don't accept it, we don't deal with that kind here. If you want to act like an ass, you can go find somewhere else to do it. If you want to act like a normal human being, all are welcome. If the community starts policing itself and starts telling cyclists that being elitist shitbags is unacceptable, both in the real world and online, I think we're going to start to see the community grow a little bit more. We're already battling so much in terms of lowering interest, safety on the roads, trying to fight these battles with drivers and cars. We need to stop fighting with ourselves. Bring more people on board. Let more people come into the sport. There's room for everybody from the very bottom of the talent pool up to the tippy top. Keep growing the community. Do what you can to make sure that we're not excluding people that will only help benefit all of us. So that's my little, I guess if you want to call it a rant. I'm not trying to denigrate anybody. I think it's just something that I've seen growing in the past several years. I've seen this elitism, instead of diminish over the years with the newer generation and the younger generations, I think it's gotten worse. And maybe that's just from my own lens, but it seems to be with the growth of social media that this dialogue, this elitism has just gotten louder and harder to ignore. But let me know if you disagree in the comments down below. I'd love to hear what you guys have to say down there. Please take the time to hit that thumbs up button if you like this video. Subscribe if you haven't already. Hit the notification bell because it's right there, and, you know, I don't know, who doesn't like a nice little ding on their cell phone every once in a while? But as always, I thank you guys so much for taking the time to check out the video, and I will catch you in the next one. See ya.